Okay. So this week's Torah portion, of course, is Toldot. The birth, the biggest thing about it is the birth of Jacob and Esau. Although in this so Toldot is related to the verb for birth, or also the noun for birth. So it can get equated in your mind with like Toldot, the birth of Jacob and Esau. But actually the first line is like this is the lineage of Isaac, which I guess is sort of the same thing, but it takes us a while to actually get to Isaac and Jacob. So it sort of recounts that Isaac and Rebekah just got married at the end of the last parsha. And of course, like every other matriarch, she has trouble conceiving. And then when she does conceive, it's so painful that she questions like why she even is alive. Like it's so difficult. So God tells her there are two nations in your womb and they will always fight each other in your womb, outside your womb for the rest of time. And foretells that the older shall serve the younger. So we already saw this trope emerging with Isaac and Ishmael, but now it's being more solidified, and we'll continue to see it as time goes on with Joseph, with Moses, etc. But that even though theoretically the older should be, the inheritor and everything, God is letting us know now that the younger will be in charge. So they come out. Esav is hairy and red, so they name him Esav. Yaakov is holding on to his heel, so they named him Yaakov. That means heel. And as they grow, we find that they develop very distinct personalities that seem to serve different parents. It's a little unclear, like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, did the parents nurture these personalities and interests in their kids because that one was already their favorite for, whatever random reason? Or did they gravitate toward that kid because of these personality traits that reflected whatever they wanted from themselves? But so there's that. Then of course we get the stealing or the trade or whatever of the birthright and the blessing. Those are distinct things that get smooshed together sometimes. That gets kind of confusing to some people. Just to clarify, the birthright is the material inheritance, and the blessing is the spiritual inheritance. They, throughout the Torah, they very much go hand in hand, but like theoretically they are separate things, and Jacob kind of finagles his way to getting both separately. Meanwhile, there is also again another one of these weird little side stories where they have to travel outside of their normal domain, and the king, this time it's the king of the Philistines, not the Pharaoh, but same story basically as what we heard with Abraham and Sarah, where they tell the people that she's his sister because he's afraid, Isaac is afraid that the people will kill him, and in order to take Rebecca, and instead he just like lets them have her, which is an interesting choice. And then, but of course, like then, God steps in, and the king realizes that these people are married and this woman is not up for grabs, and it all kind of goes back the way it should. And Isaac becomes extremely wealthy, as we see with Abraham and with Jacob. And I guess to some extent with Joseph, although he has much more extenuating circumstances, but that they just like are very successful farmers and they're very good at animal husbandry, if that's the word. So they just like whatever they plant, whatever animals they mate, it like comes back to them tenfold, or in this case, 100-fold. So there's that. And then it ends with the blessing situation and Jacob running away from home. So that's the Parsha in a nutshell. There is some really good, rich midrash, both traditional and modern, on this Parsha. I think there's definitely plenty to be said about what's going on with Isaac and Rebekah and each of their relationships with God and the situation with Abimelech and whatever, all that, for a couple that we were just told are like the first true lovers in the Torah. Like, I don't know. Then there's, the situation with the stew and the trading of the birthright. There's a few really good midrash about that like the red stuff is a lentil stew, which signifies a death in the family. And so Esau has this like existential crisis over like facing mortality, and that's why he acts crazy. I have a teacher, a contemporary biblical scholar, also suggests that perhaps Esau has ADHD or other sort of executive functioning disorders that make him act compulsively. And there's some good commentary, modern commentary from Aviva Zornberg, relevant to our talk coming up on Monday, and Joy Layden, which is relevant tomorrow night, is Transgender Day of Remembrance, and Joy Layden is a famous Jewish trans educator. And so both of them, it's not exactly the same take. Aviva Zornberg doesn't bring up transness specifically, but talks about in the blessing scene and like the masquerading that Jacob does, like how the problem isn't just that he's dressing up and tricking his father. The like essence of the issue is that he is hiding who he really is, and that in this like masquerading of masculinity, that's the part that will offend Isaac, that it will appear to Isaac like he's mocking him or Esau, which he doesn't seem to be concerned that Esau thinks he's mocking him, but he's concerned, according to Zornberg, there's like a concern that Jacob will think that Isaac will think that Jacob is mocking masculinity in this like, dress up situation, which is interesting. And then of course, Joy takes it one step later to talk about like her childhood, of like feeling like she had to parade and perform this masculinity that people expected of her that didn't feel authentic to who she was. And that she often would just skip this parsha when reading the Bible. She would just like skip this story entirely because it felt too close to her, and only after transition could she like come back and talk about what she sees is going on with that. So that's also interesting. Yeah, so there's a few topic points to start us off on, if anyone has something they want to dive in on. Debbie, you're on mute.
I just saw a cartoon about that. Anyway, about muting, not about Jacob, but the last thing you said about Jacob's masquerade and all the different things it could mean. If we don't just take it at face value that he was tricking his father into the blessing, and when we look a little deeper into it, couldn't it be that he wishes he was more like Esau as opposed to wanting to mock it? Or maybe mocking because for sour grapey kind of reasons. But here he's the second kid, but he's always after what the first one has, and maybe he's after his personality also, but can't do it.
I think that's sort of what Zornberg is saying, less about wanting to be like Esau, but more about like wanting Isaac to relate to him the way he relates to Esau, that he's jealous of that relationship and that he's trying to embody that, but he's worried that in doing it inauthentically, it will come off as a farce instead of, and so he's worried that it will backfire in his relationship with Isaac.
That's right. I forgot that he actually said that he tried to argue with his mom a little bit and said, this is maybe not such a great idea.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's been a while since I've read Zornberg's book on this, but I was reviewing a Devar Torah I wrote a few years ago about it. Because I knew I saw something that tomorrow is Transgender Day of Remembrance, and I knew I had written something about Joy Layden's take on this before, so I went and found the Devar Torah, and in the same one, I also have a paragraph about Zornberg, so I didn't even really remember that midrash or that that commentary, but it was there, so that helped jog my memory. She also brings in just like a little aside, but in her whole thing about like hiding yourself and like the way that can backfire and trying to masquerade as somebody else and whatever, she also brings in something from Midrash, from Mishlei Rabbah, which is the early rabbinic midrash on Proverbs. So I thought that was also a fun little hook because we're studying Proverbs on Sunday. And the midrash says that to neglect that which is most essential to one's authentic being is a criminal act of mocking God. So there you go. And on Sunday we can talk about why that's relevant to Proverbs.
But didn't Jacob just essentially follow? It wasn't his idea. Wasn't he doing what his mother told him to do? And as Debbie said, he questions her. What if our father realizes what's going on and curses me? And she says, I'll take the curse.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like he really is making an effort not to deceive his father, and yet he's given the name heel because he was grabbing hold of his brother's heel. So I wasn't really clear on to what extent he was a conniving SOB and to what extent he really was just a mama's boy doing what mama said or something else.
Right.
It didn't seem to be his idea, and yet it was very definitely his idea to get the birthright.
Right. I was going to bring that up, that happens first. So he already shows his, and the situation really presents itself. Like, it's not like he's making the stew specifically to be a bargaining chip with Esau, but he sure seizes that opportunity without question. So he clearly like has that instinct already. But then it is interest. So I think that again, that speaks to, now we're getting a little bit away from the part of Zornberg's argument that's like about him masquerading as something it's not, but it latches more onto that part of like questioning Jacob's relationship with Isaac versus Esau. Like he's not really worried about impersonating Esau or hurting Esau or whatever. He's worried about damaging his relationship with his father
And getting cursed, yeah.
and getting cursed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Joel.
About that same topic, my translation in the English says, Jacob sod pottage, and Esau came in from the field. So sod, of course, means sodden, like filled with water, whatever. Or I think some other translations say, oh, he cooked stew, or I'm not exactly sure what your translation says. It's 25-29, but to me, the more
This one says cooking the stew. What is
English
yours say?
translation, it's harder to read, but it raises good questions. Here's why. The Hebrew starts of Vayazed Yaakov Navi. That's what it says. And well, of course, I want to know what Vayazed means. And it just, everyone says, oh, he just cooked pottage. Now, my interpretation is he was very, very angry with his brother, Esau. And let me just put that in the chat and you can see right away. I think I have a translation there. Okay. So anyway, so the root is by Yazed is Zud, a primitive root meaning to seethe, figuratively to be insolvent, to be proud. That now, come on, that's not cooking stew. That's seething when I'm very angry with someone. I'm seething, boiling. I'm boiling, not in a good way, I'm boiling inside. And so I go, aha. So he's very proud and he does not like his brother. So anyone who likes psychological interpretation, that's a jumping off point for a good midrash.
I do like that midrash on Vayazed. My only question is then, if it's purely psychological, I mean, Esau says, give me some of that red stuff. Like, so there is still food involved that Jacob is cooking and feeds him in exchanges.
Why would he dislike his brother Esau? Like, what do
Well, we don't know yet. There's no reason. I mean, jealousy, I guess.
We can read it right in there. There's a lot of good hints that are, I think, just such great Torah. And of course, Isaac loved Esau because game was in his mouth. That's another double entendre. I think in your translation it says he liked the taste of venison, whatever. And of course, that leads us to the whole thing where Isaac's eyes are dim. He tells Esau, please go out, get me some venison. And that leads to the whole subterfuge. So we're hearing over and over that the hunter has a lot of respect from his father, whereas Jacob was not a hunter. He dealt with domesticated animals. And if you think about it throughout our history, I'm trying to look back 10,000 years ago. We were all hunter-gatherers. Why were we? Because no one had yet invented planting wheat and stuff. And by the way, wheat is very hard. You want to extract some flour from it. Now, today I just run over to ShopRite. It's very cheap. Back in the day, Oh my God, I've seen YouTubes about that. You get a
Mhm.
handful of flour out of a lot of work. So, and the hunter-gatherers, I think, they're lazier people. To this day, I've had a lot of people that I've met. Oh, I'm going out to Montana. We're going to hunt some elk, and we're going to. And in my parents' generation, my generation, hunting is like the furthest thing we're ever going to think of. In other
Well, no,
cultures,
it's not. I
no.
mean, it's not kosher.
They get deer strapped on the front of the car. They're like, they're going crazy for hunting. Hopefully there's no hunters right here. And if there are, I
Well,
apologize.
there are in our congregation, not necessarily in this chat, but we're not opposed to hunting necessarily,
Right.
as a community. But hunted food is unkosher. But again, those rules didn't apply yet for Esau. And I mean, there are ways in which agriculture is a more consistent effort. But I don't know that I would say that hunters are lazy, especially by today's standards, when, like, for any of us who do eat meat and don't hunt or own a farm, I mean, certainly people who are out there shefting their own meat are working a lot harder than
We're all
those that
fighting on the pole.
pick it up already butchered and packaged from the store. So, although I don't eat non-kosher animals and I don't like to shop factory farms non-kosher meat, I'll eat Steve's venison because I trust, his process when he kills it and stuff. I
Whose
think
venison?
it's more authentic by today's standards of how we consume meat. What?
Whose venison do you eat?
Steve Milgram,
Oh, I didn't know he hunted.
he
Oh,
does.
yeah.
He loves to hunt, and and he's good at it. I don't know. One year he bagged a big old turkey, big wild turkey, and he smoked it up. It was so good. We had a good old fashioned barbecue at his place after.
I think we
Anyway.
think about farming, about domestic raising of food, farming or livestock or whatever, as being more drudgery maybe than hunting. Hunting is maybe not always comfortable. You have to go out in all kinds of weather and cold and rainy and so on and so forth, but it's not drudgery. It's the opposite, I guess, would be a difference.
I don't know, going out to milk cows in the winter.
Yeah.
No, thanks.
I think there's more of like the adrenaline rush involved in
The hunting.
hunting
Right.
that you don't get when it's just time to bring the sheep into the slaughterhouse, like it's so much more calculated and whatever. And certainly, as Debbie says, the planting part, the agriculture part, the plants part can be drudge. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, you can
such-
love it because you can love seeing the green things come up and
yeah.
and you've created life to, and nourishment and all that out of these tiny little seeds. But still, every day there's chores you have to do to keep it going. You can't turn your back on it. You can't, and it's no adrenaline, like you said.
Well, hunting is also a sport. It's man against beast and whatever. And so
True now because we have such mass agriculture, but in ancient times, I mean, when we switched from hunting gathering to agricultural life, agrarian life, like it wasn't a sport then, it was survival. And I bet in some places, or some other time periods in the last, what did you say, Joel? 100,000 years?
10,000.
10,000 years, that there have been times again when it's for survival, when there's scarcity. Many years ago, I read a book called Ishmael, that I don't even know how to describe this book, but it's a talking gorilla, but don't get stuck on that. He's like a Socratic educator, and he's like explaining to this human student the history of humanity. And I can't remember now exactly like what the leap is, but he talks about the move from hunter-gatherer to agrarian and how that has led to our current, you know, it's not explicitly a like a critique on capitalism, but it talks about like our current, the givers and, or sorry, the levers and takers sort of methodologies of life, and those who can live off the land and like take what they need and leave everything else, versus those who feel the need to like stake claim in the land and, you know, uh, are driven by material greed or lust. And I think I remember really liking it at the time. I was 15, so caveat, um, but I think, like, if I recall correctly, that it was sort of a like fetishization of prehistoric man, of like this idea that you just like lived in the woods and ate when you were hungry and like didn't have to think about it ahead of time or whatever, that was somehow more balanced with nature. And
The noble savage.
yeah. I don't know, an interesting thing to think about now, or to think about going back to that book. Anyway, but all that aside, back to the text, the question still remains. Okay, so I believe that there are issues between Esau and Jacob, that even though I don't see Esau as the villain that classic rabbinic midrash wants to paint him as, I can also see that like Jacob's issues with him are legitimate, and a lot of it I think still comes down to their relationships with their father. But anyway, the problem still remains, though, if we read Nazed as purely, or Vayazed as purely metaphorical or psychological, there is still food involved. There's still something material happening. Is it meant to be a double entendre then, that he is also cooking the lentil stew, but the boiling is representative as well? Yeah, okay.
Before we leave this part of the story, when I read it, and when it talks about what God tells Rebecca when she's in pain, I mean, he's foreseeing the trouble between the two brothers and the nations that they start.
Right.
But he doesn't do anything about it, and I mean that shows that's an image of God, that he is omniscient, at least. Whether he's either not omnipotent or chooses not to be omnipotent is not the point, I don't think, but that he stays so often in both biblical history and world history, if you stays away from what's happening, even if he can see the pain and sorrow that it will cause, and leaving it up to us to deal with it. So, I mean, you could ask the question, well, why doesn't he just have Jacob be born first, and then you don't have to worry about it all, or change the personality or whatever? But he doesn't. He doesn't mess with things as they happen.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of thought around that. My biblical teacher in rabbinical school, the same one who posits that Esau has an executive functioning disorder. She also one time pointed out that, like, in various parts of the Bible, God is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent, but he's never all three at the same time. And they kind of take turns, being one or the other. So, like, in this case, he seems to be omniscient, but not omnipotent. In Exodus, he's omnipotent, but not omniscient. Like, all of the sudden, after 200 years, he hears the cries of the Israelites and intercedes. There's things like that like don't seem to match up with our idea that God should be all three. I'm not a mystic by any stretch of the imagination, but I do like the Kabbalistic idea of God, of like Tzimtzum, that God had to withdraw himself and pull back his own omnipotence in order to make space for like humanity to exist, for the universe to exist. But yeah, I don't know. But I will say also one other thing about that warning, about this little prophecy that Rebecca gets, is that it's not, obviously the brothers fight. And there are times that the Edomites, that the descendants of Esau, are painted as enemies of the Israelites, but they're not a primary enemy. They're not like, recurring ones like the Amalekites or the Philistines. Like, there are certainly big ones. Moabites come up a lot, although then that gets subverted by Ruth. But there are some like really big enemies, and the Edomites are really not one of them. So this prophecy of the like warring nations, I'm not sure how. I don't want to say like it's not real or like that God was wrong, but like it's not as violent that it needs intercession necessarily as some of the other warring nations in our Bible. So there is that. Much later in history, Esau and the Edomites come to be representative, I guess. Like, those words are used as stand-ins in early rabbinic texts for the Romans and the early Christians. Just like Ishmael gets used as a stand-in for Muslims or Arabs. Yes, Joel.
So in Judaism, we have 4 galutim. In Yiddish, goylus, meaning, okay, so this is the era of Galut Edom. This is the Galut of Edom today. And I think
for the last 2,000 years.
Yes, no, well, at least back to 2000. So anyway, basically Edom, I think it's pretty well acknowledged that they became the Europeans. In, of course, Holocaust, blah, blah, blah. I think we've had a lot of suffering, including today. So I think that's a connection with Edom. And something else interesting, of course, Yaakov, he grabbed the heel of Esau. So that the word means heel, but it also means the end of things. For example, in an army, Akov means the hindmost part. It's not the frontline fighters, but it's the people towards the back. And I think in Kabbalah, there's some idea that in the end times, that's what that refers to, sort of the end. And of course, also the word Akov is the same root. That just simply means because. Because. But
which
because
is one of our partial.
Such a complex word. Because might be, there's reasons that they're just too complicated for our little brains to wrap our heads around. This is just how things are. So I think there's a lot of parallels in a very deep way.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of 25, just before the very end, when Esau sold his birthright, so to speak, he
Uh-huh.
said, I am at the point of death. So what use is my birthright to me? Why was he at the point of death? I didn't quite get that reference.
Well, so again, this is where the various midrash come in. One thought being that a more traditional midrash is that so like I said, lentil stew is a sign of Shiva. So there's a midrash that this was that Jacob was preparing for Abraham's Shiva, and Esav has this like existential crisis where he's like, Sadik, Sava, Abraham, like this wonderful man, our grandpa Abraham, the patriarch of all of Israelite or Jews or whatever, like all of our people, like he died. He can die. That means I can die. I might be dying right now. And he just like has a breakdown basically. And the other thought is that, and then the more modern reading similarly is like he, again, because of his executive functioning disorder, he like can't distinguish between hungry and starving. And this is like a common problem with people with ADHD or other executive functioning disorders, that they don't remember to eat until they like are about to pass out. And if they don't have like scheduled meal times, they will not eat. And so and like it tells us he comes in famished from the field or whatever, that he probably went out hunting early in the morning, didn't have breakfast, didn't have lunch, brings back the game, he's it's heavy, he's been carrying it, working off a sweat, whatever, and suddenly he's like, oh my God, if I don't eat something right now, I am going to die. I mean, he clearly is given to hyperbole too. Like at the end, when he tells Jacob he's gonna kill him, he doesn't chase after Jacob runs away. When they reunite many years later, they hug and kiss. I think this is this is not like a real threat. This is Esau being like, I'm gonna kill you, like typical sibling hyperbole. And I think he's just given to that sort of excess of emotion.
Thank you.
So yeah, and a lot of the classic commentaries just reference that it has to do with him being so tired and hungry from his hunting, and also that hunting can be dangerous, and like what if he should be gored by a boar or something and never come home? What good is his birthright then? So yeah, Joel.
Rabbi Goldstein, did you notice that, of course, this is Toldot, meaning generations. And I was thinking back when I was reading this, Ela Toldot Hashamayim V'Haaretz. Genesis 2:4. It's the same word, Toldot. They're talking about the creation of the universe. And these are the generations of the heavens and the earth. Toldot. Now, I did notice that there's a different spelling in the Hebrew. And I said, wait a minute. Now, normally speaking, when there is a misspelling in Torah, it's corrected in a very special way. Anybody know about that?
Kare and Kativ.
Kari Kativ. In other words, it was written one way, that's Kativ. And somewhere along the line, the rabbi said, well, wait a minute. One of our scribes messed up along the way. So we're going to also include in the Chumash, in the parentheses, how we're going to read it. All right, so this
Which
is
is
not
why you
that,
have to always learn how to chant Torah from a tikkun first and not just pick up the scroll, because the scroll will only have the kativ. And if you don't know, you'll mispronounce it.
back in my,
Often it will be like missing a vowel or a letter or something.
yes, back in my day, we had very experienced Torah readers, uh, but Baal Koreh, I believe, yeah, Baal Koreh, yeah, Baal Koreh.
Mhm.
But there was someone who would follow along, and God forbid if that guy who's been doing it for 50 years just said one thing wrong, oh my God, it was, and he'd have to say it right. But you know, they were like fanatical about it because they didn't want to give anyone the wrong idea. Not that anyone knew how to translate it. All right, so notice with Toldot, there are 4 possibilities of spelling it. And I found the 4 possibilities in different verses. And
These look like they're spelled the
you read
same to me.
Hebrew
What
or you
is?
don't read Hebrew, it's just so easy to observe. And to me, it's so interesting because it really goes back to the original beginning of the writing of the Torah. Let's see if I can just put that in. And I set it apart so you can actually see it clearly. Yes. So, like, for example, here's Toldot. Like, I put the word at the top. Like the first one, there is one vav. Vav is like a straight line going up and down. Now, if I go down to the bottom one, that's 2519 has one vav. When I go to 20, if I scroll all the way down, it didn't copy the whole thing, but I'll do here. I'll just throw that in there separately. You can see at 2-4, which I'm going to put in right now, there are 2 vavs, so it's spelled differently. There's 2-4, and I'll just put that word in separately in case you can't get it in context.
Who's talking about?
Okay, so here's Toldot, exact same word, and if you notice, there's 2 vavs.
Mhm.
This
Okay. One towards the
Right
left
here.
side. So, of course, I know this from before.
This.
Very early days of the Hebrew language, there were no vowels at all. And then
He's
they
talking about the extra step.
something called the matrix lectionis, which means they started to add different consonants that could serve as vowels. So here they are in 2-4. They've added 2 vowels, Toldot. Whereas if we look in this parsha, it's also pronounced the same way, Toldot. There's only 1 vav. In the other 2 verses, there's a combination. One, when they mention Esau, there's no vavs at all. And the 4th one means they put the vav in the other position. So here's 4 different ways of spelling that one word. And it's been preserved because if it were incorrect, they would have done this other thing. They would have done the Kri Kativ to
Mhm.
indicate to people, one of the scribes spelled it wrong. So we don't want to correct it, but let's indicate where it's spelled wrong. So these all 4 are actually all valid spellings of the word Toldot. Now,
Yeah.
I tried to
Did-
pull something out of it, like what's the meaning behind this? I could not find it anywhere. No clues, nothing in my brain. So we'll go to work on it another number of years.
Often, I mean, I can't since these are all Genesis, it would seem that they are from a similar era of writing. So I don't know linguistically, I don't have like a good answer for this, but in general, often vowels were added in um like for vocalization purposes. So sometimes, so it's not terribly uncommon to see the same word spelled multiple ways with or without the vav. Um, it just has to do with like the vocalization practice of the era, because some, like when all this was written down, they didn't necessarily have nikudo either. Like they weren't written with the vowels. So the vav helped communicate that O vowel. And so things like that. But it is interesting that there's all of these from presumably the same era of Hebrew practice with such variation in like not just vav or no vav, but which vav, like that it's some of them have both, some of them have only one, but some of it's the first one, some of it's the second one. Also that I don't know, I'm wondering, I don't have a great sense of the rules around the dagesh. Maybe someone who grew up with Sav and Tav understands these distinctions better, because I was taught they're just the same. But that in Genesis 2, there's no dagesh, but in all the other ones there is. That's also, I think, interesting or notable in the if we're gonna dig into the Hebrew minutia like that. Um, but I don't have an answer. Often this is the kind of thing that you would see Ibn Ezra respond to, but I think you would need, like, he loves that kind of like, oh, this has an extra letter in this word. That means whatever, like, couldn't possibly be scribal error. Let me make up a reason for why this word is misspelled here. But because they're in such distinct places and they're like, because it reappears so many times, I feel like you would need to find a specifically like Ibn Ezra like book of Midrash or something rather than your standard Mikra Gedolot, to look at the specific line commentary. You know what I mean? Well, we're just about out of time and really spent the whole time on the same few verses. Does anyone else, I mean, is there anything we want to, yeah, Dave.
You had mentioned that birthright was something physical that was like the material,
Yeah.
and yet if that's the case, then why was Esau so dismissive of the birthright, even though he was very hungry? Because he said, this is nothing to me. I could see him saying that about the blessing, but it just didn't seem incongruous given how important the birthright was. I mean, he's saying, what do I care if I inherit a double portion? I can't see that.
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to like we were like in answer to Dave Bruce's question about like why does he think he's dying? I think there's like an impulsive issue happening here, why he thinks he won't need it. I think also there's possibly we could add the layer of like he's a hunter-gatherer. He doesn't need the land and the livestock and those
okay.
kinds of material inheritance. I mean, he like obviously everyone still needs them. Like it is still kind of silly that he gives them up so easily, but like I could see why they would feel less important to him than to Jacob, who is more of a homebody and wants to do the farming and the cooking and the homesteading,
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Who he doesn't want to be tied down in any case.
Right. And the
I can
Edomites
see that.
continue to be a nomadic people, like
Okay.
for the rest of the Tanakh. So yeah, it doesn't seem like land holding's important.
Okay. Thank you.
You are welcome. And then by contrast, you said it would make sense to you if he didn't care about the spiritual blessing, but he is heartbroken about the
Yeah,
blessing. And maybe that's like a bit of, that's the regret from the birthright stuff coming back up. Like, this was my last thing and you took it from me. But he cried. I mean, he is so distraught. Um, have you no blessing for me too, Father? I mean, oh, right in your feels.
yeah.
So, um,
And the
yeah,
fact that the blessing couldn't be given to two people.
I
I mean,
know.
yeah, you can't say who's going to have dominion over the other. You can't work that both ways, but the rest of the blessing, he could have, his father could have been a little more.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't, if Esau's his favorite, like, he couldn't come up with a better second place blessing than he did? I mean, it's so pathetic.
I mean, why couldn't they share the dew of heaven and the fat of the earth? I mean, there's plenty for everybody.
Well, I guess that comes back to our levers and takers issue. That some people don't feel like there's plenty for everybody. Um, he does give, wait, where is it? I want, um, okay. Your abode shall enjoy the fat of the earth and the dew of heaven above. Yet by your sword you shall live. You shall serve your brother, and when you grow restive, you shall break
Yeah.
his yoke from your neck. I don't know. It's not a very nice blessing. Like, I just don't understand that this is the best he could do. I find it very sad. It really breaks my heart when I read that last bit.
Although he does say he's going to get out from under his brother's control. So I guess that, I mean, the way he puts it is not nice, but at least he knows he's going to be free eventually.
Yeah.
But no, it doesn't sound good.
Well, this has been lovely. Uh, so, I guess we're done, but there's always more to come. Oh yeah, Joel, one more thing.
Yes, let's throw this in too. Remember, according to who wrote the Bible and the Wellhausen theory, this was all written long after the fact to
That's
explain why we get along with these people and why we hate the other people. So here I am over at 28, 9. So Esau went to Ishmael and took unto the wives that he had Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son. So, and also Esau's other wives, do you recall who they were? I don't have it.
They were Hittite women.
Hittite, okay. B'nai Chait, no good. And also now the daughter, the Ishmael. So remember, here we are 400 years later, and someone is creating these little stories. And here's the little kid says, "Hey, how come we don't get along with Uncle Edom, whatever, Uncle Esau?" Here's the answer: because he got married out of the faith. He's around over there with the Hittite women. Hittites are going to disappear completely. I don't know about Edomites. Are they still around? I don't think so. So that's the story that's created long after the fact. Now, we can't change that history. We can't change that. There were Edomites, the Hittite. By the way, up to 100 years ago, it was believed that the Hittites, B'nai Chait, that it was imaginary. 100 years ago, through archaeology, they're up in Turkey and they said, "Oh my God, there's this huge, powerful
Clan.
organization, it's the Hittites.
Hmm.
So in other words, there's a lot of stuff going on here that we've just forgot about for so long, yet we preserve it through these wonderful stories. So they must write it that way.
That's true. I mean, certainly.
So Debbie, I'm with you. I think he should have come up. He should have said, well, no, look, I got this special book. And in this case, I'm going to look it up. And we do have a special blessing for you. Now, come on, let's all eat.
No, but that's a reasonable, another way of looking at it, that the authors who've written down what we're reading today had their own motives, just like we
Yeah.
talk about the folks that are fans of David's legacy.
The Chronicles, right.
They tilt things one way or the other.
Right.
And here I am today, 2020, and I'm kind of bad mouthing the Edomites, okay? With the Goylus Edom. You know, they're causing all this trouble. We went through all this stuff in Europe. My God. So, you know, we can't change history in that regard. So we have to make a story. So I don't like Esau. I'm sorry.
Well, next week we'll enjoy a break for Thanksgiving, but when we come back, Vayishlach, we'll look at their reuniting, which is also a source of great midrash. Is Esau a vampire? Let's discuss in 2 weeks.
All right. Thank you.
2 weeks.
All right.
Happy
so long.
Thanksgiving, all.